Hello friends, so today I'll be talking on this 34th COVID update. So today is 2nd November. So I'll be talking about because post COVID, that's a very topical area now. A lot of patients are coming with post COVID symptoms, and this is a clinical dilemma for many as to what are the expected sort of a symptomology in a post COVID situation. So there are few articles which has come and post-COVID clinical situation, or we haven't even started calling syndrome, but it's a post-COVID clinical situation. This has been well defined by WHO now, and there has been a formal WHO document that has come out. So this is now well established entity, and I'm sure it will be called as a syndrome very soon. So we'll just look into what is the update so far on the post-COVID clinical spectrum. So this was a nice article that came from a British Medical Journal, Management of Post-Acute COVID-19 in Primary Care. So here we'll be touching about all the symptom spectrum, not pertaining to extension of respiratory failure or worsening or weaning issues. So we'll talk about all the other ancillary symptoms in predominantly people who may have recovered from COVID or partially recovered. So post COVID-19, this clinical scenario is defined as symptoms that last more than 3 weeks, even after first symptom onset, where symptoms are persistent in some way or another, even after 3 weeks after the first symptom onset. So that is the definition which has been endorsed by WHO as well. And that's a good number for listeners to keep in mind. 10% of the COVID patients who recover or who are on the pathway of recovery will have residual symptoms which constitute post COVID 19. And there is an entity called chronic COVID where it is more than 8 weeks. I'll talk about it. So they have done just a observation in US. So the return to pre-morbid health after COVID was seen only in 65% of the patients, which means a significant proportion of the patients have still residual symptoms which may be related to COVID. And the return to pre-morbid also happened after 2 weeks. So 2 to 3 weeks was the time for them to have recovered into the pre-morbid state, and that happened in 65% of the patients. And chronic COVID is also defined and it has been endorsed in WHO as symptoms persistent more than 12 weeks. So 3 weeks is post-COVID, and more than 12 weeks, the nomenclature that one could use is chronic COVID-19 if symptoms continue to persist after 12 weeks. And the question that should come is, why are some people developing this post-COVID? So some of the hypothesis that has been generated is the severity of viremia that has been present in these patients may have a bearing on them developing post-COVID symptoms or post-COVID clinical scenario. And elderly people, we all understand, are at a much higher risk, and elderly with comorbid also are at a much higher risk of developing post-COVID clinical spectrum. Or relapse of what symptomology and reinfection also is one of the cause attributed to post COVID-19 symptomology. Or frailty of an individual. If individual is very frail, deconditioned, elderly, so they all are at a much higher risk of developing post COVID because their complete recovery to wellness to their pre-morbid state is much more protracted in elderly people whose reserves would be low, or any individual who is at a much higher risk of developing post-traumatic stress. So this is also a situation if there is already a pre-existent vulnerability to develop post-traumatic stress, psychologically they are down for whatever reason. So they are also at a much higher risk of developing post-COVID. So that's why there has been a renewed emphasis on pre-morbid well-being. So if you are mentally well and if you are physically maintaining well, so risk of them developing post-COVID maybe could be curtailed to a large extent. So what are the symptoms? So the predominant symptoms, I've just put it in a very pictorial way. Headache seems to be very common in the as a post-COVID symptom, and depression and cognitive impairment. So cognitive impairment also has been found to be something that manifests in a post-COVID. And fatigue is a very important component. I will show you certain graphs from which has come in few articles. Fatigue almost remains the topmost common post-COVID situation. And temperature, niggling temperature of low grade temperature also can be a part of post-COVID. And muscle aches also is very common as a post-COVID symptom. And some patients can have maculopapular rashes or some sort of a skin lesions, which is also attributed as a post-COVID. And many patients can have this niggling cough, and some of them can have uh, exertional short of breath, especially when they have been sick enough, needing ICU care and needing high flow oxygen delivery devices. So these are the patients who continue to have this short of breath when they tend to exert in the post-COVID situation, and that also constitutes post-COVID clinical situation. Or anyone developing venous thromboembolism later on post COVID should be attributed as a part of the extension of COVID sequelae. So venous thromboembolism also is comes under the ambit of post COVID. And one of the study, the Chinese study, that surprisingly showed GI manifestations as the most common post COVID symptomology. They can have diarrhea, cramps, anorexia, nausea, all these have been attributed as a post COVID. So this is in a pictorial format some of the post-COVID symptoms that one can develop. Then the question is, see, these patients have recovered, they've gone out of hospital, and then they come back to the OPD with some of these non-specific or specific symptoms. So what are the tests that one would order? So these tests obviously are guided by the clinical symptoms that someone is presenting, and you will be guided by the clinical examination. So obviously you may do electrolytes if someone has GI symptoms, or you may do liver function tests if there are some antifibrotic drugs. If someone is presenting with cough, short of breath, obviously you would want to see whether cardiovascular involvement is there. You would possibly screen for cardiac abnormalities. And obviously, you may do a chest X-ray to see if they have developed any superadded infection, and echo, ECG, so on and so forth. So basically, your investigations will be good clinical medical practice, which will be guided by the symptoms and the clinical examination findings a clinician would elicit. So that would be the way. So this was a study, as you see, which came from Chinese group. So they studied 55 patients who have recovered from COVID. The title of the study is Follow-up Study of Pulmonary Function and Related Physiological Characteristics of COVID-19 Survivors 3 months after recovery. So they followed up for 3 months. As you see in this Chinese study, GI symptoms were the commonest, 30.9, followed by headache. Then that was followed by fatigue, 16.36, and exertional dyspnea happened in 14.55, and cough 1.8. So this is something which is an offbeat finding, because the subsequent papers did not show GI manifestations as the commonest. Fatigue always figured as one of the top three in any study that one would look at least until now. So fatigue seems to be a very important sort of a post-COVID symptom that manifests. So this is a study which came in JAMA. So if you see here, see the first one is fatigue. See, this is a post-COVID phase, and followed by dyspnea, and they had joint pains, muscle pain, joint pains. All this come under arthralgia or myalgia. So these three remained the top three in this particular study. There was another study which came, which again showed, see, fatigue is the topmost in this, followed by breathlessness, which is similar to last time. The third one was post-traumatic stress. So we can sort of deduce that the most commonest symptom presenting post-COVID would be fatigue and short of breath, residual exertional short of breath, when they cannot do the normal flight of stairs or normal work they used to do, and maybe myalgia, arthralgia, post-traumatic stress disorder. So Chinese study, as I said, is a little offbeat and does not really concur with what we are also seeing in India. We don't see a lot of GI symptoms as a primary manifestation. So how do we support recovery from COVID? So they are in the process. There is no validated post-COVID functional status scale, but they are contemplating on developing a post-COVID functional status scale to see the recovery pattern and what is their functional sort of a score in these patients. And here the whole functional scale is with an intent to do the treatment in a paced way. So the pacing of therapy becomes very important, and having clear goals as to what are the endpoints that one would wish to attain during the post-COVID rehabilitation is something that is important. And they may present with a lot of non-specific symptoms or specific symptoms, So the key element is they may give you a wide array of symptomology. The most important aspect is to prioritize. To clearly prioritize what symptom is most relevant that needs to be addressed quicker is what that needs to be established is what has been referenced. And there is a suggestion that there should be a graded exercise regime for these patients for 4 to 6 weeks, which tends to get them back to their normal state. So 4 to 6 weeks of graded exercise regime is something that is a part of post-COVID management. So when someone comes after recovery from COVID, you can't say just have a nice meals and sit at home. So some sort of a emphasis has to be laid on graded exercise that they need to embark upon. So what about respiratory symptoms and support? So British Thoracic Society defines chronic cough as something that is lasting more than 8 weeks. And there is British Thoracic Society, and even this is the WHO, which has come out with a lot of breathing exercise for post-COVID. Especially as you see, the second most common symptom is short of breath. So there is something called paced breathing. So when you click on the YouTube, you will see a lot of videos talking about different breathing exercise. So one of the common one which is sort of emphasized and narrated is paced breathing, where you take a nice breath through the nose and you exhale through the mouth. Okay, and then there is this puffs or huffs and puffs you can do, where you take a short normal inspiration, then you do a prolonged expiration. So it's like a pranayam. If any of you are doing pranayam or incentive spirometry, 12 to 15 bursts is what is suggested to do this huffs or prolonged expiratory breathing. So the whole understanding why this short of breath happens in post-COVID is 80% of the respiratory effort is predominantly by your diaphragmatic function. So, and this diaphragmatic function significantly comes down in post-COVID. So it gets deconditioned. So because there is a reduced there is a diaphragmatic function with the deconditioning, the breaths become shallow. And then there is an increased fatigue component and short of breath that tends to happen because of this diaphragmatic function which has been compromised or which has been deconditioned. And the other important breathing exercise that has been described in many documents, including WHO, is this abdominal breathing, where you take the breath. See, normally when we take inspiration, the abdomen has to be as sort of moves in. Here you have to push the abdomen out during inspiration, and during expiration you suck the abdomen in. So this sort of a breathing and taking the support of pillow on the knee below the knees is found to be helpful in post-COVID. And WHO, see all these pictures, what I'm showing is taken from WHO document. So, and these are the suggestions from WHO that to ease the breathlessness, patients should be guided and should be encouraged to lie on the side with the pillows, keeping them as a head end in as much as possible, and forward lean sitting as much as possible to optimize lung function and to ease their breathing, and forward lean sitting of this nature, and even forward lean. So basically bringing out the chest forward to a large extent helps in easing out their breaths. And when you are leaning back, so basically you keep the foot and the leg little forward and rest on the back support. So all these are some of the exercises or simple maneuvers, I would say, that has been suggested by WHO. Okay. So how about pulmonary rehab? So pulmonary rehabilitation is, so these are all simple maneuvers which obviously you can explain to the patient to do it at home. So pulmonary rehabilitation is a multidisciplinary, personalized, basically you customize, you evaluate each patient and customize the treatment, which includes not only physical exercise, but it also includes education of the patient and the caretakers, and it also involves your inputs to enhance their behavioral pattern and their psychological well-being. So basically there is some sort of a moral boosters and their behavioral change that needs to happen, physical exercise along with ongoing education. So the pulmonary rehab is not just bringing them and making them do exercise. It is a multidisciplinary customized approach to individual situation. And it has been emphasized to utilize your virtual platforms to undertake this pulmonary rehabilitation in this COVID scenario. And the fatigue is also a very common post-COVID symptomology, which has been very similar to chronic fatigue syndrome. But until now, because as you see in all the studies, fatigue remains the commonest sort of a symptomology. So there is no published literature until now for any defined pharmacological or non-pharmacological interventions to treat this fatigue component. So which means fatigue has to be circumvented with your exercise regime, boosting the psychological makeup, educating, and good nutrition, and all the holistic sort of an approach has to be put in place. So for fatigue, they have taken sort of there is no direct evidence as to what is the tools to circumvent the fatigue. The indirect evidence is taken from the sports armamentarium. So the sportsmen who returning to exercise, they follow something called Stanford Hall statement. Basically, it's a graduated or staggered exercise regime that they are subjected to return to their normal self when they have recovering from their injuries, because they also are psychologically they would be burdened. So it is a sort of a multidisciplinary approach. So in the post recovery, so this particular suggestion is taken from this Stanford Hall statement. Post recovery, once they have recovered in 1 week, it is suggested that the patients have to be subjected to all stretching exercise. So there are a lot of stretching exercise. If you Google, you'll find all these different stretching exercise. So they have to be trained to undergo these stretching exercise. If they have very mild symptoms, so they should be guided to do slow walking with taking adequate rest in between, but continue this walking distance and the pace as to how much they are able to do it. And if they have persistent symptoms, then it is suggested that exercise or walking should be restricted until they reach 60% of their maximum heart rate in 2 to 3 weeks. And if they have lymphopenia and oxygen requirement, if they have persistent lymphopenia and ongoing oxygen requirement, then they should be subjected to a formal respiratory rehabilitation center for the assessment and then taking them through the whole weaning process. And if they have cardiac involvement, obviously they need to be sent to a cardiac specialist for cardiac assessment and addressing with any medications, so forth. So this is adopted from Stanford Hall statement. So what about cardiopulmonary complications, assessment and management? It has been found that 20% of the post-COVID recovery can have cardiac involvement. So what are all the cardiac symptomology? So dysrhythmias are fairly common and they can have a lot of inflammatory conditions. They can have myocarditis, pericarditis, and acute coronary syndromes is something we have been seeing because they have a prothrombotic state. They are at a risk of developing acute coronary syndrome and they can develop pulmonary thromboembolism. So these are some of the cardiac, and all these cardiac symptoms are attributed to downregulation of this ACE2 receptor. So that is the rationale for them as to why they develop cardiac symptoms. And as I mentioned, chest pain. So it's a chest pain has been found to be a very common post-acute COVID-19 symptom. And thromboembolism also is recognized complication of post-COVID. And any patients who has been sick, needing oxygen with high D-dimers, where you label them as at a high risk, should be considered for extended BTE prophylaxis for 10 days. So this suggestion has come from the published literature. And if post-COVID situation, if their LV function has been dwindled or there has been an LV dysfunction, so treatment and the management this should be in accordance with the standard guidelines, whatever else every hospital may be following. So now coming to the older patients. See, older patients we are increasingly recognized as the group which is most vulnerable for developing post-COVID. And the most important aspect in post-COVID is they get deconditioned and they have malnutrition and they undergo a lot of muscle wasting, which we call it as sarcopenia. So a lot of muscle wasting, they get deconditioned and malnourished, and they are at a much higher risk of developing depression and delirium. And sarcopenia is what? So why do depression, delirium troubles them? So these older patients need a lot of psychosocial support because there is a disruption of them reaching out for medical attention for other non-COVID related conditions they may be having. They may have cardiac condition, they may have kidney condition. So the ongoing care of that, maybe clinical care, could be possibly disrupted in the post-COVID because they cannot reach out because of the sort of a fatigue, the weakness and deconditioning that would have set in. And the psychosocial support is needed because the elderly people who otherwise were sort of independent, they become completely dependent, and they wouldn't be able to do their routine normal activities which ordinarily they would have been doing in a pre-morbid state. And socializing of these elderly people with whatever little socializing with their friends would be happening. Like in India, many of the old people may go to a park and chit chat with their friends. So all that would possibly stop in the post-COVID. That will lead to depression and delirium. So this holistic 360 degree psychosocial support is something that has been emphasized in WHO document and any other document that deals with post-COVID situation. So there's lots of emphasis on mental health and well-being. So I'll show you various sort of a depictions of all the mental ill health that can be having. So the post-COVID, one of the common entity they have found is increased anxiety levels. So the anxiety levels would be very high, and there is increased stress in the patients who have recovered from post-COVID. So these are all serious symptoms which has been emphasized in every post-COVID document that has come. And post-COVID, most of them have a feeling of loneliness because they would have been isolated and they would have been in a quarantine. So the feeling of loneliness very much prevails in them, and they feel quite terrible and hopeless. And there is a social isolation because you have quarantined them, and there is some sort of a distancing from other family members. There is sort of a social isolation that they are subjected to. And generally post COVID they can have very low mood, and they have a feeling of doom and hopelessness. And this is another important symptoms they have recognized: insomnia. So lack of good sleep is something that has been recognized. And post traumatic stress disorder has been increasingly been recognized in medical personnel or healthcare personnel who have who have been affected with COVID and who have recovered because of all the stress that they have to take as part of the profession and as part of the disease that would have caused. So it has been increasingly recognized and referenced that PTSD typically affects the healthcare workers who have been affected with COVID. And there is a suggestion from these documents that PHQ-9 sort of a questionnaire has to be adopted to diagnose this anxiety and depression in all these people who recover from COVID, to see if there is any residual anxiety, residual depression, or residual insomnia, and all this that may be prevailing. So, so the risk factors. So there are certain distinctive risk factors for mental health and well-being. One is the social isolation and stigmatization. So once they have been labeled as COVID, and the stigma that may be associated, and some sort of a discrimination and social isolation, all these three have contributed, or they act as important risk factors for mental well-being. And the financial status, because of the COVID, it may lead to some job losses, and it may lead to financial losses. So all this also acts as an important risk factor. And social discrimination, which I mentioned. So if someone asks whether there is evidence for that, so they have done a survey in US. So if you see in Chicago, only 30% of the blacks were affected with COVID, but if you say 68% deaths happened in these blacks. So there has been a discriminatory element globally, that the marginalized sections of society are more vulnerable and are more affected. And I'm sure the same situation would be prevailing in our country also. So we just need to do audits and see whether the mortality has been more in the marginalized sections of society. And in Wisconsin also, only 6% blacks were affected, and the death, it accounted to 50% of the COVID-19 deaths. So which means your financial or socio-economic standing also has a bearing as to how badly one could be affected. So this has raised question on the leadership role, whether they have provided durable and generous safety nets, socio-economic safety nets for these marginalized sections of society. So some of the steps to counter the mental health is increasing the solidarity or feeling of belonging and supporting them. and there is increased emphasis on the mutual aid and the social support system that should be put in place to enhance the mental health. So mutual aid with compassion, empathy, all this go a long way in minimizing these mental problems. And there is an emphasis on collective, community-based sort of an activities to improve the mental health in the patients who are recovering from COVID. So social and cultural considerations. So one has to bear in mind, so to add burden to all this mental well-being, there may be a bereavement that may be happening because of the loss of the dear one in the family due to any other disease or due to COVID itself. So that also acts as a very important trigger for worsening mental health. So this also has to be factored in. And job losses is a social issue which can be a result of COVID and absenteeism. And it has been noted there has been increasing occurrence of domestic violence, the spousal sort of a violence and kids violence. So these are also something that has significantly increased in the post-COVID situation. So what are the implications for the primary team? So because of all this, so there has been recommendation and suggestion by WHO, by all the responsible agencies, that there should be a permanent sort of a dashboard, virtual dashboard to support for this post-COVID rehabilitation in all the dimensions of the problems they can have. It may be medical, it may be symptom related, it may be mental well-being, it may be socio-cultural issues, or it may be economic issues. So there is a sort of a strong signal towards establishing a dashboard, virtual dashboard, where support there can be one-stop support system for all these sort of ailments that trouble in a post-COVID situation. So this is an interesting analogy. So if you look at 10% of the patients recovering from COVID have post-COVID symptoms, and this has been looked into surveys in UK, and this has found that 10% have these symptoms. So in India, as of today, 8.18 million are affected with COVID. If you take 10% of them having post-COVID, that amounts to 8 lakhs 18,000 people in India suffering from post-COVID symptomology. And if you take Karnataka statistics as of today, we have around 8 lakhs 27,000 cases so far affected. If you take 10%, 82,000 people in Karnataka may have been affected or may have been facing this post-COVID problem. So which means there is a huge need at this point of time to establish certain health clinics or certain processes, certain SOP, certain virtual platforms to address this unique disease dimension, which can be multifaceted and which should be addressed. And more so, the emphasis should be on mental well-being and social and cultural issues which may be troubling this sort of a population. So I end with this cartoon. So thank you very much. So if you wish to rehear to this lecture, you can visit my website www.drpradeepangappa.com and rehear to this. Thank you all.